And we're back in the car on a hopefully happy hump day, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your early Wednesday afternoon here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, I'm wearing my Teddy KGB shirt, but this is not, alas, a Teddy KGB Rounders, poker, card-playing, casino, gambling type of an episode. Today is going to be a movie-centric episode with a little bit of literary leanings sprinkled in, actually more than sprinkled in. But I have seen, in the immortal words of Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman, I have seen the first trailer for Edgar Wright's, not remake of the 1987 film, but Edgar Wright's supposedly direct adaptation of Stephen King's dystopian sci-fi. Sound familiar? Or as I like to put it, stop me if you've heard this before, Stephen King's dystopian sci-fi Hunger Games before Hunger Games, The Running Man. Now there is a long backstory here, and I'm going to give you some of it because you probably don't know, but the book The Running Man was written by Stephen King at a time when he was putting out so much product that his editors, people at, was it Random House? I'm not sure if it was Macmillan or Random House, but whoever the people, not his agent, but the people at the publishing company, they thought that he was simply producing too much material and that it was starting to overload or flood the market. And whoever it was came up with an ingenious idea because Stephen King was writing so much. He had 3 books on top of what he had put out. It didn't seem possible that he could be writing this much quality work this quickly. So somebody came up with this great idea. Let's create a fictitious author. We won't tell anybody that it's not a real author, but let's create this fictitious author. And we'll publish 3 of Stephen King's more recent works under this pseudonym. But we won't tell anybody that it's Stephen King. We're going to pretend that there is this dude named Richard Bachman. And Richard Bachman is going to write Thinner, The Long Walk, which has also recently been turned into a movie after decades of trying, and The Running Man. So that ruse didn't last very long, and I can remember as a very young person, maybe 10 or 11, when I was checking out the Stephen King books on my father's bookshelf, as far back as that, probably 1981 or 82, the ruse was up, and it was understood that no, there is no Richard Bachman. Stephen King wrote Thinner, Stephen King wrote The Long Walk, Stephen King wrote The Running Man. So when the movie The Running Man came out, the Arnold Schwarzenegger version. Now, I hadn't read the book. My dad did. Neither one of us saw The Running Man in theaters. I was 13. Dad really didn't go to the movies that often. For someone who was an enormous movie fan, he was busy. He was always working. And there were a lot of books which he read, fictional books, which ended up becoming movies. And sometimes he thought they did a good job, and sometimes he thought they did a shitty job. But when I first watched the Arnold Schwarzenegger version of The Running Man, I had not read the book. I thought the movie was fantastic. I loved it. Even though the satire kind of went over my head, I wasn't quite getting it. I just saw it as futuristic, and Arnold looks great, and it's a pretty cool story. A lot of shit blowing up real good. Dastardly villains. My favorite game show host ever, Richard Dawson, playing a very twisted version of, the kind of likable goofball that he played on Family Feud for so many years. But I love the movie. And I mentioned not that long ago the answer to a personal trivia question: which Arnold Schwarzenegger movie have I seen the most times start to finish? The answer is The Running Man. Because The Running Man was rated PG-13, which meant circa 1989 to 91, HBO and Cinemax just run it on an endless, circular, repeating loop. And I watched it every time it happened to be on. If I was in front of the TV, I would look for it and let's fucking go. Ben Richards, great name. So what I later found out is that Stephen King himself And we know from social media, he's not afraid to share his opinions, but he's never been afraid to share his opinions. He was somebody who would rag on other writers who he thought sucked 40 years ago. What do you think of Louis L'Amour? I didn't think Louis L'Amour was that great, to be honest with you. I think that there are a lot of other better writers in that genre. He was always willing to take a risk of offending people. He was going to tell you what he thought. So Stephen King, not long after The Running Man came out, and this was a sort of where they were going over aspects. I don't know if it was with Charlie Rose, but it was one of those kinds of interviews where he got to sit for a long time. It wasn't, 5 minutes with Letterman or something along those lines. But Stephen King was talking about some of the films based on his works, and I don't think Shawshank had happened yet. And he talked about how he liked the movie The Running Man, and he happened to be a big fan of Arnold Schwarzenegger. But he said, it's not really an adaptation of my book. Yes, it was adapted from my book, but it's not really an adaptation of my book. And he said similar things, and has said similar things, Stephen King, I mean, about Stanley Kubrick's version of The Shining, a film that King has never really been a fan of until Dr. Sleep. And now he says, what Mike Flanagan did with Dr. Sleep, I feel like Stanley's movie plays better for me. It feels closer to what I was going for in the book. Because King has, as far as that goes, he has always said for the last 3 decades, the TV movie, The Shining, the 2-parter, I think it was on ABC with Steven Weber, he has always said, that's much closer to my book, and I kind of prefer that. I love Jack, but I kind of prefer that to what Stanley Kubrick did in that movie. So, this was the first I was learning that, although it was technically an adaptation of King's book, The Running Man, this was not my book, is what King said. There's a lot of stuff in the movie that they did for dramatic purposes, which is fine, but it kind of took away what I was doing and what I was trying to do by making the character of Ben Richards, this kind of cop who gets framed for this horrendous crime. Again, you talk about dystopian. The satire in the Arnold version will play better now, 100%, because it didn't do that well with critics, and it didn't make as much money as it should have, given how well executed, well shot, well acted, the special effects. There's some interesting CGI, but some really good stunt work and practical effects. I like the editing, and Arnold is a quote machine, not surprisingly, because this was his quote machine era, but he is an absolute quote machine. And I mentioned this before, but for those who don't know, my father's single favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger one-liner, it's not, I'll be back. It's not Rubber Baby Buggy Bumpers from Last Action Hero, or Big Mistake from Last Action Hero, or Consider That a Divorce, or Stick Around from Predator. Consider That a Divorce is Total Recall. My dad's all-time favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger moment was when, spoiler alert, he kills a character that doesn't exist in the new version. He can't. Buzzsaw. He kills him with a saw, and he kind of cuts him in two to some extent. And when Arnold, as Ben Richards, is asked, what happened to Buzzsaw, Arnold, as only he can, goes, what? What does he say? He had to split. I don't know why my dear old dad fixated on that, but he liked that quote and that line so much that he used it for the rest of his life. And not just making fun of or poking fun or having fun with The Running Man. He would use it in other contexts. Hey, where did Mr. Shulman go? If Hal Shulman, Dad's partner, if Hal had to go to a different client or had left the office, he had to split. He said that all the time. And it was never not funny because he would do it when we weren't expecting it. Where'd this guy go? He had to split. What we know, Edgar Wright, the creator, the director of the new version, and Glen Powell has talked about the fact that he met with Arnold. Well, he has the connection, having made Top Gun Maverick. Monica Barbaro, who was one of the co-stars of Top Gun Maverick, and Glen Powell as Hangman, is fantastic. I mean, he's not Val Kilmer as Iceman, but he's close. He's in the same zip code. He's terrific in that film. But he's friends with Monica Barbaro, who plays Arnold's daughter on Fubar. And I guess he said, is there any way I can meet him? I've always wanted to meet him anyway, something like that. And he told Arnold what they were doing, and do we have your blessing? Are you on board with this? And Arnold said, of course. What are you kidding? I think it's great, and I hope you make a great movie. I mean, you wouldn't have expected Arnold to be angry or fuck these assholes. I mean, I can't imagine anybody really doing that. I don't give it my blessing. It's going to be a piece of shit. No, he said, this is terrific. I love Edgar Wright. Let's go make a good movie. And I don't think Arnold plays a cameo in the new one. But stuff that I didn't know, because it was not the internet era, I just assumed, and this is where, if you're not familiar with a book, you make certain assumptions. My assumption was in the book, because if you read the description on the back of the novel, it doesn't sound any different than the Arnold film. In broad strokes, it's the same movie. Guy in the future who is very athletic, very capable, very much a badass, takes part in a futuristic game show with untold rewards, and we mean every sense of untold rewards, and people are trying to hunt him down. That's the book. But in the world of the Arnold movie, Arnold's character is part of the oppressive dystopian system, which is why I am quite convinced that people picking up The Running Man, it's going to be a ton of movie reactors who are going to watch the Glen Powell version when it comes out and then go back to Arnold, and they're going to be in shock that Arnold played that character. Oh, so it's nothing like... No, it isn't. Just in broad strokes. So in brief, in the original version, because there are people that are still going to call this a remake when it's not a remake. In the original version, with Arnold, he plays this futuristic cop on some kind of a patrol. There is a food riot in progress. We're in Los Angeles. Is any of this ringing a recent bell? We're in Los Angeles. People are angry. They're starving. And Arnold is simply doing a patrol when his bosses, presumably the government, as they say in the movie JFK, not the government, the government, G-U-B-M-I-N-T, the government tells him to open fire. And Arnold quite, rationally says, there's no one in the crowd appears to be carrying any weapons. There's no violence going on. Nobody's getting hurt. What do you mean? Open fire, asshole, more or less. Open fire. What the fuck are you doing? So he refuses to kill hundreds of innocent people, and before you know it, the hundreds of innocent people get killed anyway, and the blame is pinned on him. There's a manhunt. He goes to prison, and that's how he ultimately ends up on the TV show, the game show, The Running Man. Well, in the book, Ben Richards is not that guy. I don't know if, whatever his position is, he can't get a job in his field. And I don't know if he was a government guy that had some issues, but it's not what we saw. There are not hundreds of murders that get pinned on him. He can't get a job, but he is a family man, and his daughter is dying and needs some kind of radical, super expensive medical procedure. Again, you want to go political, we can talk healthcare. Stephen King, I don't know that he was necessarily going that deep when he wrote this book circa 1980, 1978, 79, 1980. But Ben Richards can't afford what his daughter needs, or she will probably die. A little bit of a John Q element from, with Denzel in 2001. I don't like that movie. I think that movie is lousy. It's great to see James Woods chewing scenery, but not good. But it has elements of that where, hey, I'm a working person. I should be able to have my daughter be taken care of and not die. It's something that doesn't need to kill her. Well, in the world of the book, Ben Richards is between the proverbial rock and a hard place. And his daughter needs this procedure. They need a ton of money. So he agrees to go on to this crazy game show. Now, other big differences, which we can tell from the trailer and the description. In the 1987 film, there is an actual game zone. There is a bombed out area of Los Angeles, a little bit of an Escape from LA angle a decade later with Kurt Russell, the sequel to Escape from New York. But there is a bombed out area of LA, which was probably condemned, which now serves as the game zone in the world of the 1987 version of The Running Man. So they are in a confined space. Once Arnold and his buddies, and one person who kind of screws them over in the world of the film and is thrown in with them, They don't have unlimited surface area to cover. It is not an open world movie. That's not also what Stephen King did in the book. And what we get just from the trailer, as Glen Powell is looking good and doing cool shit and firing off one-liners and everything else and dodging bullets, a little bit of a Matrix kind of thing, as if he's suddenly Neo. But the story is set it's just in the United States, and the idea is that he just has to survive out in the open world for 30 days. Now, The Long Walk, which I've seen a trailer, I think that movie is going to be a hit. I don't know when it's coming out, but The Long Walk has a similar dystopian angle, and there is a joke to be made that if you took Stephen King's The Running Man and The Long Walk, you took those two books and put them into a blender, you would get The Hunger Games. Now, Stephanie Meyer, Stephen King, I don't think is the biggest fan of, but he's never actually said, well, she took from my book. She took inspiration. Quentin Tarantino takes inspiration. It doesn't mean that it's not theft. It's not plagiarism. You get ideas and you run with them. And she was incredibly successful. I'm sorry, I don't remember who wrote The Hunger Games. Stephanie Meyer, I think, wrote the Twilight series, if I'm not mistaken. But you understand, there is always intellectual property that spurs further creativity. But it can be said that The Long Walk and The Running Man heavily influenced The Hunger Games. It just did. It doesn't mean that there wasn't anything, no chicanery, because people love The Hunger Games. They love the novels. Many people will say the books are way better than the movies. I'm not really a fan. I saw the first Hunger Games movie. I didn't think it was that good. It was just okay. Maybe because of my familiarity and how many times I watched The Running Man. But my perception is that this film is going to be really good because Edgar Wright really hasn't missed. He has made movies that blend comedy with action, and I think that we're going to get the action and the sci-fi, and there's going to be certainly a lot of philosophical stuff, which exists to some degree, but it's more implied. It's more implied in the Arnold, in the Arnold version, because Arnold is looking great and throwing off a lot of wisecracks and stuff like that. And he got to cast one of his best friends, Sven-Ole Thorsen, the strongman, in a role as Richard Dawson's kind of security, if you will, and a tiny role for Arnold's best friend for decades, the late, great two-time Mr. Olympia, Franco Columbu. And I didn't even know that Franco was in the movie until, 15 or 20 years ago, where I read it. I said, well, I didn't even see him. Where is he? He's one of the techs on the phone. I think he's on the phone at a certain point in the film. So we don't know the entire layout of the new Running Man. But if it is as close an adaptation, we are going to see a lot of really crazy stuff. And Josh Brolin plays the character played so beautifully by Richard Dawson in the original. But another important note is that they took two characters in the book and turned it into one. The character that Dawson plays in the movie is two characters in the book. And we see in the trailer, Coleman Domingo plays the host of The Running Man. And Josh Brolin plays Damon Killian, the producer. You cut corners. You're making a movie. You don't have unlimited time or an unlimited budget. And that's what you do. You saw even with Harry Potter, with some of the books, there are characters that are not even there. And that's the art of adaptation. And when you're doing it at the studio level, everybody has to be on board with the changes. And a story I always tell, and it bears repeating in this particular episode. When Clint Eastwood, 30 years ago, got his hands on David Baldacci's Absolute Power, an enormous best-selling book, I might add. Baldacci was just knocking out one bestseller after another. But when Clint, after finishing work on The Bridges of Madison County, just for reference, after finishing that, he got his hands on Absolute Power and decided he wanted to direct it. And then he said, not only am I going to direct it, I'm going to star in it as Luther Whitney, the jewel thief who accidentally witnesses the President of the United States committing a capital crime. That's the book. In that particular adaptation, the main character in the book does not exist in the movie because the character of Luther Whitney, played by Clint Eastwood, is also the hero of the movie. He is not the hero of the book. He is the hero of the movie, and they eliminated the hero of the book, because there was no other way to tell the story. If Luther Whitney's the hero, what do I do with the hero of the book? Ben Richards is the protagonist. He is the main character in the Running Man book, the Arnold movie, and this one. But my perception is he's going to be an even more sympathetic character because of the daughter. He's going to be an even more sympathetic character. There won't be anybody who just dislikes him because he's working for law enforcement. And the Mick Fleetwood character in the Arnold version even has a moment where Arnold goes to him for help, and he basically says, "You're one of the cops. You're one of the people who trashed my work, who burned my songs." Mick Fleetwood, the joke was that he was basically playing himself, 30 years later. I hope that Glen Powell, and I don't think it's going to happen, I hope he gets to at least one of Arnold's one-liners. He was a real pain in the neck. I hope he gets to say that. And I, fingers crossed, that something happens in this movie where he gets to say he had to split. Because somewhere, my old man will know, and he will laugh at his single favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger line being repeated. Now, also similar to the Running Man came out in, I think, right around Thanksgiving of 1987. This is also slated for a November release. My guess is the film is not quite completed. It's probably close. Principal photography wrapped a while ago, but this is the sort of effects-heavy movie where it's not going to be a quick process. Oh yeah, they could release it now. No, there's no way this movie is ready. Maybe as early as September, you'll start hearing about, screenings for the studio executives or whoever it might be. And then hopefully we don't hear any stories about reshoots, or maybe we shouldn't have cast Glen Powell. No, hopefully everything is copacetic. My sense is really good, and the footage looks fantastic. It appears to be a kind of a heightened reality, and Glen Powell just has that old school movie star look, and I think this film is going to put him over the top into, superstardom, because he's real close. But Twisters, that was an ensemble effort, and the one he did with Sydney Sweeney, Anyone But You could argue people were just as hot going for her, because obviously she's quite a striking individual. But I think that the new version of The Running Man will at least be as good, because the irony of the Arnold version is I believe the movie is way better than it was given credit for at the time. The satire missed many people, and it will land now. It's 38 years ago, and it feels even more dystopian than it seemed in 1987. And the whole thing with the reality TV ethic, and the fact of people just wanting blood and not even really giving a shit who the good guys or bad guys are. They just want blood. Hence why in the world of that film, spoiler alert, they start rooting for the bad guy who's actually the good guy. The morality is all fucked up, and that's another reason why the movie is just so damn good and so underrated in the quite extraordinary career of Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I'm excited at the prospect, and I can't wait for the release of Edgar Wright's direct adaptation of Stephen King's fantastic dystopian sci-fi action novel from the late 70s, The Running Man. This has been episode 576 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your, hopefully, happy hump day here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, he had to split. Peace.